Thank you, Ms. Kate. My name is Rory. It is my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, former two-term governor of Massachusetts and a candidate for the Republican nomination for the 2020 election, and a self-described Confederate internationalist. I am very pleased to introduce Governor Weld.
Thank you, Rory. Well, thank you all for coming out. It's an honor for me to be here. As mentioned, I'm contesting the Republican nomination and entering the Republican primary for President of the United States in the election next year. I've been a long-time observer, a three-time resident of Washington, and it does strike me we need some major changes down there in the way business is being done. I'll just tick off some of the things that I would do if I started Monday in the Oval Office. Number one, I think $1 trillion a year in deficit is simply unsustainable, and nobody in Washington seems to care very much about that. In every state, the governor has to balance the budget every single year by state constitution, and Washington has resisted that, and they've fallen into this habit of adding $1 trillion a year to the deficit. President Trump's latest multi-year budget added another $9 trillion to the deficit with a T. So we're now talking about $30 trillion of deficit, not 20 anymore, which we were talking about just a few months ago. And that's completely irresponsible. The analogy to a household, we all have to balance our books at the end of every month, and the federal government refuses to do so. It can be other ones. When I was governor in Massachusetts for 2 terms, I was ranked as the most fiscally conservative governor in the United States by both the Wall Street Journal and the Cato Institute. We're 2 people who care about this. And that's coming after 12 years of my good friend Michael Dukakis, who did not have the same record and reputation. Matter of fact, the state was known as Taxachusetts, and by the end of my 2 terms, that label had almost disappeared. I understand it may be making a comeback these days. So that's number one, is having fiscal discipline and being an economic conservative, which I always associated with the Republican Party. And I've been a Republican since I was 18 years old, unlike the president, who spent most of his life as a liberal New York City Democrat. Not that there's anything the matter with that, but I do think that consistency in economic and fiscal conservatism counts for something. Number two, you see all the hullabaloo in Washington every single day, and the result of that, one cost of that, is that the work that needs to be done is not being done. You all have probably read about, I'd say a little bit about the future of work and the future of education, these kind of 2 serious topics. You've probably read about artificial intelligence and the impact that's going to have on jobs. Drones do a lot of work that used to be done by hand, robotics, machine learning, these new supercomputers, and above all, self-driving vehicles. All of those 5 things are going to take a big toll in terms of jobs. And most people estimate that between 15% and 25% of all the jobs that exist in the United States today are going to be gone in 10 or 15 years. And one easy example to think of to make this real, long-haul truckers. Long-haul trucker is a great job. It makes between $100,000 and $150,000 a year. And as soon as those self-driving vehicles get on the road, and that's within 10 years, those jobs are going to be by definition gone. In fact, in 36 out of the 50 states, driver is the most common occupation. It could be Domino's Pizza or it could be long-haul trucker, but that's a lot of jobs. And nobody is really planning ahead for what to do about this. It's going to be a national issue and a national problem. And there is a solution though. The bad news is all those jobs are going away. The good news is those jobs are going away because the economy is getting more and more technical, and there will be replacement jobs in the new economy, but they're going to require technical skills that the people who have those jobs now don't have. So, and the technical skills that are going to be required demand 2 more years of post-high school education. So the solution, obviously, is to equip those displaced workers with those skill sets. And, you know, everyone makes fun of Bernie Sanders and college should be free. But I'm talking about a very limited universe, the displaced workers who are going to lose those jobs. And I've looked at how much it would cost to give them, say, 2 years of community college, or maybe it's even an online course, because the distance learning online distance courses have been shown recently to be as sticky in terms of sticking in your head as the old Little Red Schoolhouse that we all went to. And the cost would be tiny compared to major social costs. It would be a fraction of 1% of a state budget. And I can tell you, having been a governor, that governing is all about priorities and making choices. And it would be child's play to fund the amount of coursework necessary so that all those displaced workers could get those replacement jobs. Kind of a happy ending. Is anyone in Washington working on this in a disciplined way? No, they're not. And how do I know about this? I belong to a group of international former heads of state, and I'm their designated artificial intelligence guy. So I preside over a bunch of meetings with experts on this topic, which is how I got deeply into this topic, which is particularly, which is sometimes called the future of work. But that's just, you know, doing the job that has to be done. Then there are policy choices where I think dangerous choices are being promoted by the current administration. The president, as you know, has a one-word policy for climate change and environmental remediation and the effects of the melting of the polar ice cap and how CO2 emissions need to go down, or else we're going to have temperature increases of 2 degrees centigrade per year, and that's going to have all kinds of consequences. His one-word program is hoax. So the whole thing is a hoax. Well, he's about the only person in the world who says he thinks that it's a hoax. He has even implied that the 2,000 scientists who say that, you know, unless we reduce the amount of carbon going in the atmosphere by 2030 or 2050, the polar ice cap is going to melt, which means all the mountain glaciers around the world will melt, which is the only source of drinking water for about 500 million people. No one else takes that position, but it frees Mr. Trump from the necessity of, again, doing the hard work that has to be done to see, you know, what steps we can take fiscally to reduce the amount of carbon emissions. And you hear a lot about you know, the Democrats' proposed Green New Deal, and they say, you know, we need more wind, more solar. That part of their proposal is correct. And we also, in this part of the country, we have the advantage of Canadian hydro, so we need more hydro. I myself would put in nuclear power as well as something we got to go back to. You know, in my coming of age in Massachusetts, the Massachusetts-New Hampshire relationship was dominated by a shooting war between Governor Sununu, the first John Sununu, and Governor Michael Dukakis, who just always hated nuclear power. Incidentally, the first draft of the Green New Deal, drafted by Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and in the news quite a lot recently, included nuclear power. But all the politically correct people made her take that out because nuclear energy creates waste, and therefore it's not clean. You know, that's baloney. The problem with nuclear waste is about this big. It's already been solved by Yucca Mountain out in Nevada, but we could never get the waste stored there as long as Harry Reid was the leader in the Senate. And I think it'll be solved by putting it in the ocean if it can't be put in a mountain. So I propose that nuclear power should be about 25% of the power in the grid that fuels all our electricity industry nationwide. You know, if you take that approach, you are going to be able to have the reduction in CO2. It's a lot of work. And the president campaigned very hard in West Virginia and said that he was going to save the coal industry. You know, I'm so sorry to say this, but the coal industry is already, it's gone. It's not going to be able to survive just because of economics. And the president says the future of energy is coal and oil. Well, he's the only person in the United States that thinks the future of energy in this country is coal and oil. It's just kind of a convenient political short. So that's an issue where I would go a very different direction from what the president's doing, and that's an easy to understand issue. And you know, from the point of view of New Hampshire, unless we cut that temperature increase, we're not going to have any snow on the White Mountains. Okay, the White Mountains are not going to be white. Bad enough we lost the old man in the mountain. Now we lose the snow on the mountains. And, you know, there really would be a lot of rearrangement of the coastline. I mean, there's going to be a lot of shorefront property that right now is 15 miles inland. So we really don't need that. I know in the city of Boston, we're already planning for a 7-foot surge in the ocean. So we have to build everything almost on stilts. And pretty soon that's going to be 14 feet. And it's absolutely real and it's measurable. And the president denies it, but there's really no basis for that except politics. So again, the hard work is not being done. In education, hugely important, obviously, in both of our states. Again, when I was growing up, New Hampshire had the highest college board scores in the country. And when I got into office in the mid-90s, Massachusetts was a little bit below the middle of the pack in terms of reading and math scores, K through 12 I'm talking about, not university level. So I went to the Democrats in the legislature and said, look, we've had some really good economic luck the last few years because I had cut taxes a bunch of times and worked very closely with the business community, so unemployment was down, state revenues were up. So I had some excess state revenue. And, you know, I looked around and I saw that the per pupil expenditures on education varied widely from $25,000 a year per pupil in the Wellesley, the rich western suburbs, to $6,000 a year in the inner cities, where, guess what? As a result, the schools were terrible. And Massachusetts, as I said, was below the middle of the pack. So I said, look, I will put X billion dollars more into K through 12 education if you, the Democrats in leadership, and the teachers union would agree to give me some management rights and some high stakes tests to make sure there's rigor in the system. So I put in all that money, and they agreed to high stakes tests for kids in 4th, 8th, and 10th grade. And if you don't pass the test, you don't go on to the next grade. And when you get to 12th grade, no social promotions. Johnny has to pass those tests, or he's not just going to get handed a sheepskin. And the terrible fact was that the teachers were just delighted to get Johnny the hell out of there if Johnny didn't know anything. It was one less problem for them. So Johnny would go on to community college and flunk out of remedial math and English and start all over again. So that wasn't doing anybody any favors, least of all Johnny. So we put in these tests. Within 2 years, Massachusetts went from 26, 27, 28 to number 1 in the country in both reading and mathematics. And it held that position for 25 years in a row, right through up to the present, through 2018. So that's something that involved hard work, and I would want to look at something like that at the federal level. It's something for which the president has shown no appetite. So I hope I've conveyed that I do have an appetite for work, and I think I've got enough understanding of the policy to deliver on that. As Rory mentioned, I'm an inveterate internationalist, meaning I would not be an isolationist the way Mr. Trump has done. His foreign policy seems to be kind of counterintuitive. It's to insult our allies and play up to the dictators who most people used to think were our opponents. And he's ripped up a lot of treaties. He ripped up the North American Free Trade Agreement that I worked on when it was coming in, and then negotiated the identical twin. So that's really no change. He ripped up the agreement with the Western Allies and Iran to limit their nuclear weapon development. And I'm not sure that was a good idea, ripping that one up, because now we've got Iran making nuclear weapons which can reach the United States that we didn't have before. I'm not sure what the point of that was. He said the worst treaty of all was the Trans-Pacific Partnership with 12 Pacific basic nations, some on the American side, some on the Asian side. He said it would be dominated by China, so therefore he didn't join it. Well, China wasn't a member. It was not to be a member. The whole point of the treaty was to give the United States a beachhead in Asia with 12 free trading nations without China at the table, but he didn't know that. So that was a major, that was really too bad. So in the international area as well, I've spent much of the last 15 years doing international business work in China and in Asia and in Africa in the resource and technology areas. So I do have a lot more international experience than most governors would have, and certainly than Mr. Trump had before coming into office. I don't really blame him so much for not being able to step up to some of these issues, because he had absolutely no preparation for being president of the United States. It was a really once in a lifetime election in 2016. But I do think it's time to get back to basics, back to hard work, and do some of these things that I've been speaking about, and I'll give it my level best. My strategy for the election is grounded in large measure on New Hampshire, which makes presidents, as former Governor Clinton used to say. In Iowa, they make corn, and in New Hampshire, we make presidents. I'm going to be spending a lot of time here. I always have, but my goal is the goal that John McCain had when he was campaigning in the Republican primary here, which is to meet every voter in the state. And Peter Spalding, who was John McCain's chairman, is the chairman of my campaign here this year. So we hope we're able to duplicate that. But that's enough from me, and I'm very grateful to you all for coming out. I'm happy to take a swing at questions if that's appropriate. Actually, or is that okay?
Oh, yes.
Questions? Yes, ma'am.
If you get in, what will you do for special needs?
Special needs services if you're elected.
Well, Massachusetts always had, I believe, among the most generous special needs provisions, both in education and in general. And I'll continue that. Massachusetts has been very generous state that way. I will say that when I came into office, I did privatize a bunch of state services that were being delivered to the developmentally disabled in big red brick buildings with bars on the walls. And we put that out to bid to the nonprofit sector who deliver the services at about 60% of the cost, which is much more dignity for the recipients. And we move people into houses with no more than 11 customers being there at a time, with much better staffing ratios, with 4 staff for every 11 people, as opposed to 3 per 100. And the whole model under, again, it was the Dukakis administration, had been that the state had to do everything. So all these nonprofits, particularly in the minority communities like Dorchester, Roxbury, Mattapan, they wanted to help what they saw as their people. This is not the developmentally disabled I'm talking about. It's just people who needed help. So modification in service delivery. My favorite social service agency when I was in office was the Catholic Church. They just did a marvelous job and more efficient than the government in taking care of people. But Charlie Baker was my number one assistant on all that, and he's just the most passionate guy anybody ever met. He's now the governor down in Massachusetts. And, he went all the way to getting elected governor without people knowing that he spent 30 hours a month in a Big Brother program taking care of kids and serving as an employee. Never talked about it, but that's the kind of guy he is. That's the mindset that I hope we would bring to special needs.
How would you address the healthcare crisis in the country, rising costs for individuals?
So the question is, how would I address the healthcare crisis? And I wouldn't be on either side of the folks in Washington D.C. Half of them say repeal it now, and the other half say don't touch a hair on its head. I think the Affordable Care Act did do one very good thing. It added 20 million people to the rolls of the insured, and that's anything we do. The two objectives are number one, low cost, and number two, maintain the quality of services, which in the United States is the best in the world by a wide margin. So I give the Affordable Care Act credit for lowering costs in that manner. The problem with the Affordable Care Act is that there's so much government in it, and government making the decisions. As you know, it mandates that everybody have a Cadillac plan, so they have to be able to get anything at any time, no matter what the context. I would favor a more individual-based system, where individuals could have very much tax-advantaged health savings accounts, kind of like a 401k retirement savings account. And individuals could put away money tax-free against a rainy day. And they can make their own decision as to how much money they want to put away. It's kind of like buying insurance. Some people like to have a very high deductible because it lowers the cost of insurance. Okay, they could do that. Other people can't miss a paycheck. There's a frightening statistic I read recently that the average American family cannot deal with an unanticipated $500 charge to the family budget. That's a sobering statistic. So let people take matters more in their own hands, and yes, let the patients and the doctors make the decisions as opposed to a bunch of government bureaucrats. So I think the system could be very much simplified that way and get the bureaucracy and the government out of it. As many of you probably know, I'm not a movement conservative Republican. I'm more closer to the libertarian side. When I worked for Ronald Reagan for 7 years, half of us were movement conservatives, social conservatives, and half were more libertarian. And we would joke about it at staff meetings, and then go out and get the boss's work done. And the boss was Ronald Reagan, and that worked just fine. Well, people don't seem to joke about it so much anymore, and they sort of get at each other's throats. But I'm I always work with everybody. I happen to be pro-choice on the issue of abortion and reproductive rights. Half my vote in Massachusetts was pro-life. So I'm on the other side of that issue. I never rub anybody's nose in anything and say my way or the highway. I just say this is sort of where I am. Happy to work with everybody. I was almost famous for working with the Democrats in the legislature. Kind of had to be since they had a 3-to-1 majority. But that would be the general approach to health care.
Yeah. So I'm really glad you mentioned climate change.
Yeah.
Especially as a Republican, as the young person that believes philosophy, so I just want to say thank you for that.
Yeah.
There's another existential crisis, and you briefly mentioned the Iran nuclear deal. It's the issue of nuclear weapons, and that's, my generation is also inheriting a world with lots of nuclear weapons. And there are a couple of different ways that policy experts are now talking about as opportunities to make us a little bit safer. One of them is a no first use policy. But I wanted to ask you specifically about sole authority. So right now, a president has sole authority to use a nuclear weapon on another country. Would you, as president, be willing to alter that system?
Oh yeah, no.
We need the vice president or secretary of state maybe both.
We absolutely need a check on the untrammeled power of the president to launch a nuclear war. You just don't need that. It's a risk we don't need. The leadership in Congress and senior military people, they're not crazy. And indeed, if you involve people like that in the decision for a nuclear strike, you're really spreading the risk of an error. I myself think Mr. Trump came pretty close to pressing the button on North Korea early on, before he fell in love, his words, not mine, with President Kim for being such a strong young kid. Why was he strong? Because he killed his uncle, and he killed his own brother. What a strong kid. Mr. Trump's words, not mine. There's something wrong with that picture. But before he fell in love with him, he was saying, you know, fire, fury, destruction, such as the world has never seen. The President of the United States should not talk that way. It's not helpful. And I belong to a group of former world leaders, mostly heads of state, prime ministers. I was only head of a state, not states, but these guys all knew me from my travels around the world, so they elected me a member. And we get together several times a year and talk about what are the most important issues in the world. Issue number one, the most important issue in the world, year after year, is nuclear non-proliferation. Because as you point out, that's an existential threat. It's a threat to all of our existence, not to our comfort levels. Issue number two is religious sectarianism, which in a lot of parts of the world is a euphemism for Sunni versus Shia. Issue number three is water. Issue number four is food. That's what these folks worry about when they go to bed at night, thinking about their people. And that's a responsible head of state worrying about that sort of thing, as opposed to the applause that may come from funny line or rally. I'm glad to hear what you said. Politically, I think my task here is to enlarge the electorate that's going to participate in the Republican primary elections. New Hampshire, like Massachusetts, is a crossover state where independents can vote in either primary that they like. There are 20 states that permit that, and most of them, even a Democrat can take a Republican ballot. And obviously, I want a bigger electorate. I don't want just voting politics. I don't want just the Republican State Committee to decide it. Although they did, you may have noticed a couple months ago, they did recommend that the first in the nation primary be abolished because they didn't want Mr. Trump to have to go through the trouble. Well, that motion kind of failed for want of a second in this state because people aren't stupid and they understand that a lot of the clout that New Hampshire has nationwide comes from that first in the nation primary. Everyone, all eyes must be on New Hampshire. But millennials and Gen Xers in particular are people who I think are, getting the short end of the stick from Mr. Trump's policies. And number one that I always think of is the deficit. My generation is not going to pay that bill. Yours is. And I think about Social Security. If you think you might not get Social Security, you might be right unless something's done about that deficit. That's why that's my number one issue. And climate change, again, your generation reaps the whirlwind. So I think they line up bing, bing, bing. And if I were a millennial, I'd be damn interested in this election and wanting to do something about it. Turn it back.
How would you address the growing immigration issues, mostly at the southern border? Specifically, would you propose any changes in opportunities for people who are trying to come here in economic reasons to get work, have more opportunities to stay?
Listen, I was always proud. I took civics, I took American history as a kid. I was always proud that we were a melting pot. Mr. Trump seems to want a lily white nation. I'm not exaggerating. And he wants us to get all hot and bothered about anybody from any other jurisdiction, any other country. And I just consider that to be un-American. You look at the teams that compete in the Olympics, okay? The Italians look like the Italians, the Ethiopians look like the Ethiopians, the Americans look like everybody. We look like everybody. And Mr. Trump wants us to be ashamed of that and to say we shouldn't have anybody coming in. It started with the Muslims, and now it's the brown people coming across the southern border, just trying to get us all stirred up and filled with resentment and even hatred is not too strong a word, because I think he thinks, maybe correctly, that it suits his political purposes. But I think it's most ignoble. So on immigration, my thoughts are kind of the opposite of Mr. Trump's. I think, matter of fact, I know we need more work visas, not fewer. Any governor will tell you from Texas west that the agriculture industry and the construction industry in season would grind to a halt without all those people coming across, yes, the southern border. And they're very hardworking, and they work for 4 months, and then they go home again, most of them. The 11 million illegal immigrants you read about all the time, those are people with ordinary work visas who have overstayed their visa. As soon as they're out of status, they're a, quote, illegal immigrant. It doesn't mean they, crawled across the border with a knife between their teeth. They're anybody with a work visa. It could be a graduate student at Brandeis University who came from China. Suddenly they're an illegal immigrant if they're a few days past the expiration date for their visa. So I would propose a guest worker program such as Canada has, very successful. People can come, work for 4 months. Yes, they send a remittance home. Then they go back. And most of the people who are in that program with Canada, they have no desire to be a citizen of Canada. They want to live where they live with their family, but they want to come north because the job opportunities are better in the north. So, and in terms of what I would change at the border, the experts say we don't need a 200-foot high, 1,000-mile-long wall. We need more people to process people at the border. We need more drones to detect people illegally trying to cross the border, or worse, trying to prey on the people in areas like Tijuana, where people are called coyotes, and they just lay in wait to murder and rape people coming across trying to get in the United States. You can patrol all that a lot better with drones than you can with 10,000 border agents. So the pros say we need people and drones and not a great huge wall. Something about a great huge wall, I don't know. Again, I grew up during the Cold War, so I remember the Berlin Wall, Checkpoint Charlie. It was just a symbol of how rotten the Soviet system was. And I think if we build a great big huge 300-foot high wall, at some point the president of Mexico is going to be knocking on the wall the same way President Reagan knocked on the Berlin Wall and said, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." One of Reagan's great moments. More ladies? Any more ladies?
Yeah.
Ladies have all great questions. Sorry.
Governor, I thank you for coming and speaking to us this morning, and I appreciate your insights on some of the technology direction that we're headed into. Right now, I feel that we're in a cyber warfare that's going on, and I would not say it's just Russia, and there's more to concern us than just voting systems. My understanding and my background shows that they're being hacking into our utilities and various grids and some of the other things. Microsoft announced yesterday that they had found over 740 invasive attacks into voting systems. And I'm wondering if you could speak about this. I feel it's an important thing for people to be aware of, given that if our grid goes down, our internet goes down and things, that's going to really be terrible.
Listen, under Reagan, I was head of the criminal division of the Justice Department in Washington. So I got to do all the international narco trafficking and terrorism and all the bad things that countries do to each other. And I have bad news for you. Everybody spies on everybody. We spy on our friends, we spy on our enemies, and everybody's trying to hack everybody. Not quite like the Russians and the Chinese. They're the past masters of cyber hacking right now. But, and I've studied, I've sat with senior national security officials by way of getting briefed to be president. And, we're in a hot war with those countries all over the world, primarily Russia and China right now. And what you have to do is it's very technical, all the cybersecurity stuff, and you have to make it more painful for them to hack into your systems than the advantage that they would get. And it's highly technical, but I assure you that our people are hard at work.
Well, I understand, for example, to illustrate your point, that our military has also put Russia on notice on their utilities and things. So I'm concerned about an escalation of this.
It's a very big, bad world out there. which is
Yeah.
why it's a good idea not to go around making extreme statements and issuing threats and sanctions and tariffs and just trying to be as negative as you possibly can.
Thank you.
You mentioned voting
Mhm.
and hacking into the voting system. I myself, speaking of millennials, am a great proponent in the idea that people should be able to vote using their cell phones. It's called mobile voting. And the theory is this, these phones already recognize fingerprint, they already recognize iris, eye identification. So you can vote on election day with your cell phone, taking a selfie of yourself, which would be date stamped to go to the election bureau and prove that you voted on that day. You know, it would be a photograph of you voting on election day. It would be more secure, frankly, than the current system of my name is John Smith. I live on Laurel Lane. You don't know me. You never saw me. You're not going to ask me for any identification or anything. I want to vote. This would be more secure than that. And if that were possible, talk about expanding the electorate. You know, the reason why only 49% of millennials voted in the last election is a lot of them sort of think that going to the voting place is like a submission to authority, which they're not wild about. And I've seen this when my kids went to public school in Cambridge, Massachusetts. You know, a lot of the parents wouldn't want to show up. They'd rather spend the night in a police station than in something that looks so authoritative as a school. So I'd go to these PTA meetings and I'd be the only person there. And if we could get people who could vote that way, I think you'd see 75% of the millennials voting. And then I would win every primary. I'm all for it. Yes.
I'm thinking about three issues right now that I'd like to address. One is what we can do to improve our democratic process here. Two is you mentioned wanting to cut the deficit. I'd like to know what big cuts you have your eye on and help us do that. Three, I'd like to address the rising cost of college.
Cost of college, right. So in terms of improving our democratic processes, I want as many people as possible to vote, as opposed to some elements of the Republican Party who seem to be suppressing the vote, particularly in southern states. You know, the mobile voting is just one idea. I want to make it as easy as possible. So all the same day voting and all that stuff. You've got to build in security, but I think encouraging people to vote. This whole thing with the census and are you a citizen, that's a thinly described suppression effort by the Republican National Party. In terms of the cost of college, another way to put that is the cost of student debt. There's a provision now in federal law that student debt cannot be renegotiated. Congress might as well have said repaying students. You know, it's like the recent abortion laws in Alabama and Georgia. They might as well have said repaying them. You know, so that provision about renegotiation of student debt should be repealed. By the way, that would be a start. I am sympathetic, as I said earlier, talking about the displaced workers. You know, that's a societal problem. Kids graduating from college with $200,000 in debt, and they can't get a job that pays more than $23,000 a year. That's a social problem, a national problem. So if something short of saying everything's free from now on, you know, as Sanders, Warren proposals, I'm going to go there, but I try to work out a measure of relief there because I think it's a shared problem. I just happen to have 3 millennials at home, so I'm not unfamiliar with it. But I would have a partnership between the national and state governments to work out a measure of relief there. Yeah, sure, go ahead. Finish.
What is your tax policy?
Tax policy? Oh, I never met a tax cut I didn't like. Seriously, I cut taxes 21 times in my 2 terms, but I never raised a bit. the unemployment rate started at 10% and went down to 3 and change, because small businesses, which is where 80% of the jobs come from, as this audience probably knows, they don't have to have a huge tax cut every year. They have to know that it's a one-way ratchet, and taxes are only going to go down. And then they'll buy that piece of equipment, or they'll build a plant next door. So, in terms of general theory, I'm always in favor of less government and more for the individuals and more for taxpayers. My motto when I was in office, which should be everyone's motto, is there's no such thing as government money, there's only taxpayers' money. But those folks in Washington, they think that's government money that they're playing with. So my tax policy is the lower taxes, the better, all kinds of taxes. I probably would look for something with a little bit more equity in it than the big one that went through in 2017. I mean, the top 10th of a percent made out awfully well for that tax cut. That is not necessary. That is not necessary to stimulate job creation. It's maybe necessary to reward people who are big political dollar contributors, but that's not a good reason. So I would have more equitable tax cuts. I used to be obsessed by the picture of the head of household, family of 4, income $32,000 a year. That's the federal poverty level. The first thing I did when I got in was to greatly increase the earned income tax credit, which is for the working poor, because I thought as a moral matter, even as a prudential matter, social cohesion, preservation of society, it's very important that the door to the middle class not be slammed in the face of the working poor. And that's a major risk. So I would apply a lot of equity there to make sure that that didn't happen. It doesn't mean that I'm a softie who thinks people shouldn't have to work. On the contrary, I'm the guy who put in the first work requirement for welfare. And our welfare rolls went down the next year by more than 50%. And people historically had said, oh yeah, don't worry about me, I'm looking for work, I'm looking for a job, I'm studying so I can get a job. And I said, oh no, not a problem. You don't have to worry about finding the job. I've got the job for you. You're going to come and you're going to paint here at this power plant, a municipal power plant. You're going to come here, rake leaves at this beautiful campus of this public school. People said, no, I'm not. They just didn't want to work. And they didn't need the welfare, but as long as it was just free money, they were willing to take it. So the welfare rolls went down more than 50% the next year. That became the model of the 1996 federal welfare reform law. So, yes.
Thank you for being the governor. I'm a registered Democrat, and I wanted to hear you speak about those middle of the road politicians.
Right.
On the Democratic side, you have way too many contenders.
Right.
On the Republican side, you have few.
Right.
And I was wondering how you are going to do those coalitions within the party for your nomination.
Well, my argument to the voters of New Hampshire, which includes Democrats and independents and not just Republicans, is if you really prefer my policies to Trump's policies, and would prefer me not come for 6 years, why don't you vote against him twice? Come in and vote in the Republican primary for me, then take a long hot shower with soap, and go back to being a Democrat. But meanwhile, you can be assured that a vote for me is a vote against Mr. Trump getting 6 more years. Whereas if you throw a dart in the air, let's say there are 5 or 7 candidates surviving at the end of the Democratic primary. Maybe you've got some. Maybe you live in Vermont and you're passionate about Bernie Sanders. Okay, I get that. But if there's 3, 4, or 5 Democrats that you think are about the same, much more economical and powerful for a Democrat or independent to come in and vote for me in the Republican primary.
I haven't considered that vote for someone else in the Senate, but within the Republicans themselves, how are you going to create a dent in support that?
Well, we're probably going to be announcing our steering committee in the next couple of weeks. It's people from what you might call the Bush faction, the Romney faction. Those folks are almost all of them some of the ones were holding jobs or were members of the Trump organization in various states. But no, the reaction I get on the ground in New Hampshire is, keep doing what you're doing, kid. This is great. The country needs you. Stakes are high. We get it, really. Maybe we're the silent majority, but we do get it. I literally shook over 200 hands in 3 diners. Now it's a couple of months ago. Didn't get a single pro-Trump rise out of anybody. And these were people who were disturbed when they were trying to eat their breakfast.
There was a question earlier about how you would address the budget deficit. I don't think you were addressing
Yes.
it.
So when I came into office, I just read a book called Laboratories of Democracy by a man named David Osborne. And the idea is states are good to try things out. And he talked about the concept of zero-based budgeting, which is when you're doing your budget each year, you don't start from last year's appropriation for each account. This is an answer to the question, how would I cut in Washington? You assume each appropriation is zero unless that program performed well the previous year. So you're not necessarily going to leave the accounts at zero if you have, for example, a very effective preventive health program that allows people to go get some treatment that prevents expensive operations and has a lot of good health outcomes. You might multiply that one by 3 or 5 because it's so effective. But if there's something, as there is all too often in Washington, that is a program in the Bureau of Mines, interstate commerce that has more to do with some long dead senator and the political power that long dead senator had to set that thing up, and it just goes on like Topsy automatically. That goes to zero. So we did that literally. Again, Charlie Baker, who's now the governor, was my administration and affairs administration and finance secretary, and we would start everything at zero. In Washington, they start everything at last year's appropriation plus 5%. And the Democrats want plus 5% for social programs. The Republicans want plus 5% for military. And they scream and scream and demonize each other, so they scare their own base into giving them lots of money so they can get reelected, which is what they're obsessed with. Me, not so much. I was national chairman of U.S. term limits, so I don't have the Washington disease. But at the end of the day, the Dems and the Rs get together in Washington and say, okay, we'll compromise. We'll raise everything 10%. And that's what they do. And that's where you get $1 trillion deficit. It's just having the political will. And I had a big advantage. I've been a federal prosecutor for years and years, but I'd never been in elective office when I got to the state house. So in one sense, I knew very little about the state budget. But in another sense, I knew just the right amount, because I didn't know that there were sacred cows in the state budget. And I didn't even know that they were cows, much less that they were sacred. So when people told me, oh, you can't touch that one, that's a sacred cow, I would say, no, not my language. And that is the true answer to how you cut spending in real dollars year after year. Again, I was rated the most fiscally conservative governor in the United States. Yeah.
So kind of dovetailing off that question with regard to spending and your fiscal conservativeness.
Right.
The United States has a plan to modernize their nuclear weapons. It's projected that it's going to cost $1.7 trillion over 30 years. I'm wondering, as president, what would your position be on that program? And the particular amount.
You mean the plan not just about big nukes, but little tactical nukes?
Yeah, I mean it's a blanket program.
I'm not absolutely sure that's a bad idea. I mean, I hate to even talk about nuclear weapons because it sounds like you're going in the opposite direction than, nuclear weapon policy should be like tax policy. It should be a one-way ratchet, fewer nuclear weapons. And if I have in mind the program I think you're referring to, it wouldn't say let's have more nukes. It might just have smaller nukes.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not so sure that's a bad idea. But the main thing about nuclear weapons is that you don't want more of the big guys. And President Trump has gone so far as to say Japan and South Korea should develop their own big guy nuclear weapons, because then they could use them to, as a deterrent to China. That's exactly the kind of thinking we don't need, honestly. Yellow shirt.
First of all, thank you. We on the Weld Facebook page just absolutely hitting as hard as we can. And if you could, every once in a while, jump on Goodwill, just so that they see remember there. One of the things
You're saying that to these nice people. Go on well2020.org. Make yourself heard.
One of the big questions is, and it's going to initiate in South Carolina. A number of state Republican committees have already declared that they're going to declare Donald Trump as the winner of their states without a primary, without the American process of election, claiming that Republican and Democratic primaries don't fall under the purview of the Constitution, only the general election does. When they do this, will you be prepared to take them down in court ahead of their primary?
I'd be inclined to sue. As I say, they tried that in New Hampshire. No primary. The president has made no secret of the fact that he thinks there should be no primary, in fact, no election. He's already talking about his third term. I must say, I'm very wary about his long-term intentions. Taking the position that a free press is the enemy of the people, that's a phrase out of, the playbook of tyrants everywhere. Making people think the judiciary is very dangerous. Another page out of the playbook of tyrants. That's how people in Europe and Central Asia and how strongmen have taken over. I do think that Mr. Trump, with all deference, would like to see himself as Napoleon Bonaparte riding in on the white horse and quote, save us all. The one person who comes in to save us all winds up saving us, not saving us all.
You said, Trump yes, I'm prejudice. Whoever the president is, there are always another, there's always journalism protect themselves against this, but how can the next president, if the next indeed there something that they want to do the issue?
I don't know. My wife and I go to these dinners in New York a couple every year for freedom of the press and taking up collections to defend reporters who are imprisoned or, Khashoggi case killed. Too late for Khashoggi. And we give them a lot of money and we talk about it, a lot of the implications of it. And I talk a lot about the Bill of Rights. And Mr. Trump is no friend of the Bill of Rights. And, as a libertarian-leaning person, I particularly am serious about the 10th Amendment, which is the powers not delegated to the federal government are reserved to the states, respectively, or to the people. And that's the foundation of a lot of my political theory. But I agree with you. I think the assault on the press is perhaps the most dangerous of all of them. And I think the president would have to use the bully pulpit and call out evil where he or she sees it, like I'm pointing out what they're trying to do in the South, basically suppress minority voting. Okay, so I don't have a dog in that fight, particularly except that it's evil. So I have to call it out.
Yes, thanks for coming. I'm interested in finding out. I'm a little confused with being a Republican in New Hampshire and finding out that they're being held hostage. The only option we have is Trump.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Well, it's not true. I'm not on the ballot.
I understand that, but other than.
Well, the reason you're hearing that is because the Republican State Committee here is the Trump organization. So Steve, the head of it, his job is to make sure that nobody, from voting against guns. They sent out a memo from Washington to the state committee here, the town committee, saying, if anyone representing Bill Weld shows up at one of your meetings, move to adjourn. If that motion fails, walk out of the room. They don't want anybody to hear anything from anyone representing Bill Weld. They're terrified of the idea. We're national reporters, so I talked to them and say, well, we called out the Republican National Committee and the Trump campaign and said, what do you think about Bill Weld? And they won't even repeat the words. They won't utter my name. So, I think it's a strategy. It doesn't mean they're scared. It's not what my strategy would be. Mine would be more open and engaging. But it's, no, it's not a pretty thing. All right.
You're gonna give one more question?
Yeah, I was going to say.
So, Governor, I'm here because I'm looking forward to President Trump. But one of the things, being business leader, I have to ask you about, what is your position on Second Amendment rights?
Oh, I'm okay. Well, I'll tell you my position. There are 300 million rifles in private hands, lawfully acquired in the United States. I regard them as a bulwark against the government. So, years and years ago, I said, gosh, I've been a hunter my whole life, so, guns aren't so threatening to me. And I think partly as a result of getting more steeped on the libertarian side, I now come to see guns as an issue of self-defense, not hunting or enjoyment. And so I think all these measures about, we want to license all the firearms, and maybe you take it in and you show it to the police chief once a year and say, here's my gun. Because year one, it'd be, okay, see you later. And year two, it might be, hey, that's a good looking rifle. Well, we'll see you next year. Year three, you come in and say, okay, I'm leaving out with my gun. And the answer would be, no, you're not. That's staying here now. You see it kind of spread up a lot the last few years on what happens in countries through the agents when the government makes it impossible to own a firearm, either for everybody or for a class of persons. Mr. Hitler made it impossible for Jews in Germany to own a firearm. So when the knock came on the door of the Stasi, there was no way that they could resist. They got carted off to the concentration camps. 12 million people dead. Joseph Stalin in Russia, same thing. 20 million people dead, all enemies of the regime. Idi Amin in Uganda passed this sweeping reform law. We're going to reform the firearms law so weapons can't be in private hands. 50% of the entire country was slaughtered within months, and it was the 50% that was his opponents. It's too bad that there's such ignorance about firearms in the country. People think if you have a rifle, if you put a little tripod under it, suddenly it's an assault weapon. No, it's not an assault weapon. It's only an assault weapon if it's a fully automatic weapon, which is a machine gun. And it's illegal in this country already, and has been for many years, to own a machine gun unless you're a federally licensed firearms dealer. But not only does the press, my friends, the press, not only do they not understand that, they can't tell you the difference between a rifle and a shotgun. So there's a lot of ignorance out there. But you could put me down as a strong supporter of the rights of gun owners as against the government. And I don't mean to modify it, strong supporter of the rights of gun owners. Okay, thanks a lot, everybody.